How do you know what recipes people really want? Welcome to Everything Cookbooks, the podcast for writers, readers, and cooks. I'm Kate Leahy, and I'm here today with Andrea and Wynn. Hi, Andrea.
Hey, Kate.
I've got to ask you, you hear from your audience through people who read your books, through people who subscribe to your newsletter. You get requests from people. Maybe they're looking for certain recipes. Maybe they want to know how to make something. But what kind of recipes are people looking for?
Well, it's hard to gauge, but it's also exciting to engage in conversations with people about what they want. But I more or less subscribe to what the Rolling Stones sing in the sense of there's a difference between what people want and what they need.
Tell me more.
Because I think sometimes people want to cook delicious food, but they really need the tools for doing that. And those tools are different for different cooks, right? Different levels of cooking. And you got to figure out where that is for your audience.
What level of cooking, how much time they have, how familiar they are with certain ingredients or techniques. It all goes into recipes, right? I mean, it's so hard to write a recipe that hits all those marks.
Yeah, exactly. You got your check boxes. You got to tick them off when you're putting a book together. But first, you got to figure out what those check boxes are.
It's true. So do you think there's a formula for writing a really good recipe?
I always tell people I don't want to be my mother. I was always looking over my shoulder when I was growing up and learning to cook. And that's still true. But I'm always worried for myself. Like, am I giving too much information or not enough? It's so bizarre.
It's so hard to figure out the balance because what could be too much information to somebody is not enough information for somebody else. You know, sometimes you just gotta go with your gut.
Yeah.
What's great about today's conversation is we get to talk to Emily Weinstein of New York Times Cooking, and we get to pick her brain a little bit about what makes recipes tick. I mean, she has so many recipes at her fingertips. Recently, she and her team put them together in a book called Easy Weeknight Dinners. You've worked with Emily in the past.
Yes, I have. She has contracted me for certain stories. I've pitched to her. She's edited my work too, so I respect her highly. She is one of the smartest and most thoughtful editors that I've ever worked with.
That says a lot.
Yeah, and so seeing her present a book like this, Easy Weeknight Dinners, with her curation, but with the voices of so many others, is very exciting to me because it's really a product of many, many years of her being at the New York Times.
And, you know, that's a really good point you're making about her skills as an editor, because I don't think on this podcast we've talked to somebody who is an editor first. She's coming at creating this book with an editor's mind. She's bringing in all these voices. She's curating this list of recipes, and we'll get into how she figured out what recipes there were going to be, because when you have a database, that makes your job a lot tougher to choose the 100 all-stars, right?
Exactly. Emily has to create like a rubric for herself and her staff, but then also to just, thinking of that kind of funnel concept to really nail down 100 recipes for the new book, Easy Weeknight Dinners.
Just to give you the subhead, 100 fast, flavor-packed meals for busy people who still want something good to eat, which is kind of all of us. She's been at the Times since 2007. She's been the editor-in-chief of New York Times Cooking and New York Times Food since 2023. Today, we get to pick her brain, so let's bring her on.
Awesome.
Emily, welcome to Everything Cookbooks.
Thanks for having me.
Your book is distilling recipes that you think are really going to work for busy home cooks. Andrea and I really want to know, what makes a great recipe?
I'm glad you asked this, because one of the things I thought about as we were putting together this cookbook in particular, but also generally for NYT cooking, we do a lot with our recipes. We see ourselves as documenting culture. We want people to learn about the world through our recipes, cuisine, again, culture. But also, we're really there to meet people's daily needs. Those are not mutually exclusive goals. But if we're not meeting your daily needs, what are we doing here, right? I still want to do that in a way that's interesting and exciting and teaches people something. I think a lot of the recipes that we publish, and certainly the recipes in this book, have that sort of aha moment. It's the light bulb of like something really clever, whether that's the use of an ingredient, whether that's a different cooking tool than you might have imagined for that recipe. I'm thinking of Eric Kim's sheet pan bibimbap, which is not in this book, but a really sterling example of that way of thinking. It's Kenji Lopez Alt's mayo marinated chicken with chimichurri, right? You read that recipe, you think, okay, I guess I'm going to slather mayonnaise on my chicken and see what happens when I grill it. And, these are the kinds of moments in home cooking where you try it once and you marvel, and maybe the way it changes the way you cook that dish or that ingredient forevermore.
You mentioned in the introduction about like clarity and the length of a recipe in terms of the recipes that you chose for easy weeknight dinners, which is just like this book that you just want to like hug and keep in the kitchen. So you didn't start out as one of these romantic cookbook writers or cooking curators where you learn at the aprons of your mother and all that. So like this is always a very gradual process. What's your rubric for what makes a good recipe? Because there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of recipes that you all have in the portal. Yet, we're down to 100 in easy weeknight dinners.
So yeah, we have about 24 recipes right now in the catalog on NYT Cooking. Also, I should say too, there are 100 recipes in this book. Easily could have made this book several times over using recipes we already have in NYT Cooking, 100 different recipes each time. I mean, we really have, I would say in the past 5-6 years, invested so much in this kind of cooking and this kind of reader service, basically. I mean, this is reader service for home cooks. What makes a great recipe? I think a great recipe is clear. And by clear, I mean, it tells you exactly what you need to know for the ingredients. And it kind of takes your hand as a cook and walks you step by step, right, through the ingredients. When you look at recipes from the first, cookbooks published in the United States, the recipes are along the lines of like salt roast, put roast in fire,
right. Make porridge or something, right?
You're like, cook until done, and I think that's emblematic, first of all, of a certain kind of cooking in a certain time, right? But also the fact that there was this shared skill set and a different kind of approach. Now I think people are coming at cooking from all sorts of perspectives and experiences. A lot of those traditional skills are gone. People get all the way deep into adulthood and don't know how to cook. And there's no shame in that. It's just life. That doesn't mean you still don't need to feed yourself, and it's never too late to cook. Detail really helps people cook. So clear writing, detail, threading the needle between enough detail to be helpful, but not so much detail that you're overwhelming people.
But that's so hard. Doing that sort of juggling act, that is sort of like Andrea and I've had conversations offline about this for years. How do you figure out like how to thread the needle? It keeps us up at night.
Yeah. I wake up in the middle of the night going, Jesus, I have too much info in there. I don't want to be my mother.
I don't know. Your mother seems great to me.
She's only mellowed now that she's 90.
A couple thoughts there. And this is where it helps that my training really is in editing, right? Like, so I'm the editor-in-chief of Food and Cooking here at the Times. I have always worked as an editor in this space, right? I write too, but when it comes to the recipes themselves, I'm an editor. I'm really looking for the kind of language that serves as a cue for people. A lot of metaphors, a lot of like, you want this to be the color of, Melissa Clark uses this one sometimes for caramel, the color of an Irish setter, which is like perhaps too specific for some people, but like talk about an evocative way to describe what the color of the caramel should be. Dory Greenspan, I think, is a master of this too. It's just how can, in a really friendly, warm way, can you again, take the home cook by the hand, walk through the recipe. It's almost like you're giving somebody directions, right? You're saying, okay, you're going to turn left at the corner, and then you're going to look for the blue mailbox, and then you're going to like make a left around there, and the road's going to split. Same sort of thing in a recipe, right? But if you give them too much detail, they're not going to remember it. You're going to be like, there's a blue mailbox.
So
and
true.
I think the number is number 16.
Or you go on a tangent and talk about the neighbor's house and how you don't like the paint color, and then you've kind of totally lost the plot.
Exactly.
Especially in this book, the recipes have to be short too. And we'll talk about how you you figured out which recipes needed to be in this book in a moment. But I first just wanted to know, like, did you have to edit these recipes differently to make them work in print versus how they work online?
No, I mean, the vast majority of these recipes appear exactly as they did on NYT Cooking. Of course, 10 Speed Press has their own copy editors, their own house styles. So there are minor style changes. The commas might land in different spots, things like that. But for the most part, these are the recipes as they ran on NYT Cooking. We tried to proceed really gently with the recipes themselves. The headnotes were edited, I think, in a little bit of a heavier way, because when you're looking at a collection of headnotes, you kind of want them all to more or less be the same length. And when we develop weeknight recipes and we publish them for NYT Cooking, we're very cognizant of the format. And of course, here we're talking about a book, but the principal format is your phone. Right. Majority of people are using NYT Cooking on their phones. And so we think a lot about, okay, they're scrolling on their phone. What are they seeing? And does it feel intimidating? Does it feel overwhelming? Are you scrolling and scrolling and scrolling to get to the bottom of the recipe? For home cooks, I think, especially people who are less confident in the kitchen, the people who need recipes the most, if they see a recipe that's way too long, I think it's a little harder for them to get to yes on it.
Right.
And sometimes a recipe can be as simple as it can be, and it can still be long. That's okay. It's okay to live in that space. But sometimes a recipe is really long because it has extra steps in it. And that's the moment you ask yourself, like, does this really need a gremolata?
Yep.
Maybe not.
Maybe not.
It's a good gut check moment too.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, editorially, what's interesting is I'm looking at the fried snapper with Creole sauce recipes. There are instructions, for example, this is such a stupid point, but it's like, place it over medium heat. You don't have heat anymore. You just say, place it over medium.
That's so
right?
true.
And we, as NYT Cooking readers, know what you mean. And then there is this thing in recipe methods writing. It's like, where do you put the vessel? Is it at the beginning of the sentence or after the sentence? And it has to be pretty consistent. I mean, over the lifetime of my cookbook writing experience, like the damn copy editors, like the vessel can only be at the front. I'm like, that is so boring. I am always in a large bowl or a large skillet or in a large wok, right? But you vary that too. You move the vessel. So editorially, like, you've got a style sheet at NYT Cooking. Mm-hmm. So how do you make that sound so like you're friendly and you get the cook to a yes?
First of all, you've made me feel like I've done something really cool. It's like I've moved the vessel.
Yeah, you moved the vessel, baby.
We're off the charts. We're out of the box.
I know. I'm going to say move the vessel now, and people can just,
Yeah, I'm like, where does your vessel sit?
You've hit on something that I feel is really important, which is we do have a style sheet. And we do have really rigorous editing. That's part of, I think, the value of NYT Cooking is that if you come to us and you cook one of our recipes and you follow it, like if you don't off-road too much and you follow it, we want you to get a good result. That's part of the trust with our audience. And that's frankly just part of the proposition of the New York Times, right? We're part of the New York Times. You should trust us, right? So we edit and we test really, really rigorously. But I'm always mindful of the fact that you don't want to edit out a writer's voice too much. We do have many editors here who work on recipes. We have a wonderful recipe editing team, and we've had different editors, come and go over the years on that team. So a lot of different people's hands have been on these recipes over time. So there is some natural variation there. You'll just see that in the editing. But more and more, I think, too, we want to keep those moments in where it feels like somebody's specific. So if you want to put your vessel at the end of the sentence and we still feel like it's clear for people, they're still going to know where to put their vessel, what vessel to use, then to me,
this is a new pickup line. I want you to know.
We're going to put your vessel.
A lot of times when we talk about voice in a cookbook or in recipes, we talk about the headnote as being the place for voice. It's rare that we talk about the instructions being a place for voice, but clearly it is, because you need to have that sort of friendly guide in the kitchen to get someone to go on this trip with you. And so you're not specific to like, this is house style. We need to sound like this. We need to sound like this all the time. You really want to embrace those kind of differences.
More and more, yes. I mean, hey, look, and again, I want to emphasize, like, we have a house style, and if things are too loosey-goosey, our editors, they're going to be in there. And also our editors, more than ever, I think, are attuned to how do we make this recipe work for as many different people and as many different places and as many different economic circumstances as possible, right? Like we're always looking to give you alternatives, that are more budget conscious, for instance. That's one thing we're thinking about a lot lately, especially looking at the news with inflation. And I think they're very attuned to that now, and probably more so. Every sentence starts this way. But yeah, I mean, voice is important. Recipes, more and more, I think it's essential that they convey a certain warmth. People want to know the people behind the recipes. And we see that on social media. We see that in cookbooks. We see that in video, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. There is a connection there, and your voice doesn't go away as soon as you start to type something, right? You're still a person with a voice and something to say and something to communicate about the dish. As much as possible, we try to preserve that while still threading the needle between too much detail and not enough detail. There's a lot to really take into account.
And one thing I'm curious about then is that you have so much already going on. You are really a busy person. You don't need a cookbook project, I'm thinking. Tell us just a bit about this book concept. How did that come about?
There's a brilliant editor here at the Times. Her name is Caitlin Roper, for the record. And she leads a team here that is focused on taking the work of the New York Times newsroom and expanding it into books, TV shows, film deals. Easy to imagine how a lot of work coming out of the Times can go in all these different directions, right? And one of the first things she said she wanted to do when she stepped into the role, it's a relatively new role, she wanted to do cookbooks. And she was the one who said to me right off the bat, like, the first one is Weeknight Cooking. And I was like, it sounds great, and it is off of the 5 Weeknight Dishes newsletter. We launched that newsletter in 2018. I write it weekly, and what I do is I choose 5 recipes from NYT Cooking, a mix of new and old, short and long, all different ingredients. Some have meat, some are vegetarian, different flavor profiles. I curate this and we blast it out every week. It goes to millions of people. And my hope is that people open it and they find one thing that speaks to them for the week. Nobody needs 5 recipes. No one's cooking a fresh dish every night. That's not really how home cooks cook. The 5 isn't meant to be Monday through Friday. The 5 is like, here are a bunch of options for you. We launched this newsletter because we understood that there was this need. Like, people needed these recipes in our audience, and we weren't exactly packaging them that way yet. We had a very successful newsletter for all of NYT Cooking, but it also included special occasion cooking. It included baking of all kinds, easy, hard. We have pastry there. We have bread baking. We already had that. We needed the thing that was just focused on easy weeknight cooking. And that was that newsletter. The success of the newsletter pointed to this idea of like, hey, this is a book, obviously. And that's how we got here. But the recipes are all NYT Cooking recipes. I don't want to mislead anyone into thinking that like I went into the kitchen and developed all the recipes. I very much did this in my capacity as the editor. And the reason the book is delicious is because of the talented people who work at NYT Cooking. I mean, Ali Slagle, Eric Kim, Yewande Komolafe, Melissa Clark, like these are people whose recipes absolutely are bursting out of this book. And it's really exciting.
The cookbook before this one was no recipes.
Mm-hmm.
So then now we've got recipes.
Yes, we have extreme recipes.
Yeah.
Like follow the recipes.
Exactly. So you as editor-in-chief now, this is a position that you've had since 2023, and congratulations. And so like, you're like all of a sudden now, all right, everybody, here's how you're going to cook. How do you bridge that?
That book, as you mentioned, is quite a different book, right?
Yes.
And it's for a very different home cook. And I would argue springs from a very different moment in NYT Cooking, where it's like, hey, you want to cook quick and easy. You already know how, and go to the kitchen and make pasta with chickpeas and a Negroni, right? That's one of the recipes in the book. It's pasta with chickpeas and a Negroni from No Recipe Recipes. And I love that book. Sam Sifton, who was then the editor, he's the founding editor of Cooking. He did that book. I still think we have those people in the world of NYT Cooking, but we weren't quite serving the people who needed more help than that, and a lot of people do need more help than that. And in my experience, most people aren't just ready to wander into the kitchen and freestyle.
Yeah.
It's just a very different ethos, I think.
Yeah, their pantry is different because I remember going through Sam's book, No Recipe Recipes, and he was like, yeah, you should have Chinese black vinegar in your pantry. And I'm like, you should? Whoa, I'm all in, but so I feel like that's almost like the senior level, graduate student level cooking, whereas here it's more like sophomore, I'm thinking.
There are so many new flavor profiles that people are experiencing when they go out to eat, and they don't necessarily know how to replicate that at home, but they also don't have that much time. And I feel like these recipes come in and do that for people. I mean, one of the pages, your need help deciding index, what it is, it's 2 pages, and there's categories for recipes that could fit. Like, you don't have to look, maybe you're not sure if you want to have a chicken recipe or not. So you can go, oh, I want to make something spicy, or I want a 1-pot minimal dishes recipe, or something good for freezing. I mean, those were such clever categories. So how did that index come about?
That was another Caitlin idea. Caitlin being my colleague here at the Times with whom I worked on the book. She was like, I really, really want to have a fun index. And I want it to be in the front of the book. An index is usually in the back of the book, right? She wanted it in the front of the book, and she wanted it to help, of course, get people where they needed to go as quickly as possible in the book, which makes sense when you think about who the book is aimed at, who the book is for, like we're cooking dinner, we're getting there now, But also, what I love about this index in particular is it is fun at the end of the day. And, I love to cook. I absolutely love it. It doesn't change the fact that it's sort of a task on the to-do list, right? And I think for some people who don't love to cook, it's like, it's a chore. But it doesn't have to be that way. There are ways to make it delightful. There are ways to approach it with humor and in the spirit of fun. And touches like that in a cookbook, I feel really help.
There's even a section if you're feeling really lazy. And we've all had those nights where you're just like, I don't even want to think about it. I'm hungry, but I don't. I just need to feed myself.
Like, I feel like we all need a Caitlin when we make a book now, because she's coming at it from a different angle.
She is. And she is a home cook. I mean, she loves to cook. She's an NYT cooking power user. When we were putting together the list of recipes for this book, she was chiming in. She's like, you have to do this one. Like, this one is great. And she persuaded me actually to put in more, she calls them handhelds, like handheld recipes. I'm not somebody who gravitates towards sandwiches for dinner. It's not like a values thing. It's not a philosophy. I just don't, it's just kind of not where my head's at most of the time. And she's like, no, we need sandwiches that you eat over the sink.
Okay. Interesting.
I would imagine one of the hardest things about this book was figuring out what recipes to put in it. How did you figure out what those 100 recipes needed to be?
Oh, we're looking for the magic mix. I think as an editor, you're always looking for the mix, right? You want a mix that's dynamic. You want it delicious. You want to give something for everybody. I mean, it's hard to imagine that somebody would come to a book like this and cook like every single recipe. I would love it if they did, but it's sort of the same thing I was saying with my newsletter. It's like, give people a lot of different ways in. If you give them 5 recipes, hope they pick one. Hope one calls out to them. And this is sort of that same principle writ large. I wanted to give people ideas for the sorts of recipes they already know and love. I wanted to persuade them to try something they might not have tried before. There are recipes in this book that are dead simple. There are recipes in this book that take a little longer because, you know what? It takes a little bit longer to cook bone-in chicken, and like bone-in chicken tastes better in most scenarios. So you really want it mixed up, and then you want to signal really clearly to people, hey, we're giving you lots of options here.
Yeah.
So it was about getting that mix. We had our categories, I had a giant spreadsheet, basically. It's unsexy, but true. A giant spreadsheet with the different categories. And I'm like, oh, we have to have that. It's like, oh, but then this is a little similar to that. So maybe not this one, because that also has all that heavy cream, and kind of moving things around so that you have dishes that are heavier and lighter. You have dishes that I think some people would think, oh, it's indulgent. There's butter. And there are dishes that are like, this is like, if you're mindful of things like that, like we have options for you here too. But I think my goal as an editor is it should vibrate at the end. It should feel interesting. It should feel dynamic. Like you should feel drawn in by the possibilities and the options.
But you also mentioned that these are recipes that take less than an hour.
Yes.
Only 2 pots, no more. And like, you just need a blender, you don't have to get a processor out or a stand mixer. You have to set those rules for yourself and the promise. That's the promise.
It is the promise. And that's actually the criteria I use for my newsletter recipe selection as well. I almost never deviate from it. And if I do, I say like, okay, you need a 3rd pot. This is because cleanup is part of a recipe, right?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Have we done you many favors if you can cook the thing in 30 minutes and then you spend like 45 minutes cleaning? I'm not sure we have.
Yeah.
It all comes from a place of empathy. Real life is hard.
Yeah.
It's annoying.
It is. We just want to play all day.
Yeah. Wednesday night dinner cleanup is never where you want to be spending your time.
I know. And I say this in the book. I don't mind cleaning. I will. I load the dishwasher. I run it. I don't leave dishes in the sink. I try to be a good citizen in my own home, but I don't like cleaning. I much prefer cooking. My husband, who actually can cook, people often assume that he can't, which is a whole other gendered blah, blah, blah. But like, he can cook, but he's totally good to clean. He doesn't care. So I am not the principal cleaner in my home, which I love and highly recommend. But like, even so, like I sit there with him a lot of the time while he's cleaning. I keep him company. You don't want it to take too long.
No.
What a bummer.
No, exactly.
Going back to what you said, most people are using, their recipes nowadays on their phone.
Mm-hmm.
So we're thinking about how to make the instructions clean and clear, precise, without being boring. So the cooking portal at NYT, at the New York Times, is a very lucrative thing for the newspaper. So why create a print product?
I mean, for the same reason you guys create print products, right? They're wonderful. They're totally wonderful. And people love them. And there's still a place for them. I mean, all I was saying was that people use NYT Cooking on their phones. Mm-hmm. And the only way really you could use NYT Cooking, unless you had one of the older cookbooks, right? No recipes. You could use it on your iPad. You can use it on your computer, your laptop, or you could use it on your phone. So I meant more in that context. I have a big cookbook collection at home. I don't tend to pull it out on weeknights. I have a few cookbooks I refer to sometimes that are a little faster, but my cookbooks at this point are a little bit more of a luxury. It's like, I want to bake something this weekend. I love to bake. I don't get to do it often enough, but I have a big collection of baking cookbooks. I love contemplating what I'm going to make, and I love spending time with books. And I think there's a specialness about them that you can't replicate in an app. There's an aura to it. It feels really good to hold it in your hands. And, this book does sort of collect all that is great about the speed and utility of the app, of the recipes in the app. It does collect it all in one place. And having a book for 100 recipes is like much easier than scrolling through 100 recipes on your phone. This is one area in which the utility of the book does really shine. But yeah, I love books.
Well, we do too.
I guess it's the curation process. Yeah. Andrea and I sometimes talk about books like a cookbook, like being an album. It's a collection that somebody's done the work finding, like picking out ideas for you. Whereas when there's a lot of recipes to choose from online, it can feel overwhelming sometimes.
And sometimes you can't find what you need so easily, and it's bothersome. And I'm a dinosaur. I read a print newspaper every day of the week, and I subscribe to the New York Times and 4 other newspapers. So that discovery is very exciting.
Just as someone who's worked broadly in digital news at the New York, I've worked at the New York Times for a long time, trying to replicate the sense of discovery you get from the newspaper.
So hard.
Really hard.
Yeah.
Really hard. And I don't think you can replicate it. I think you have to create something else in its stead. There is just nothing that compares to it. And of course, we still print a newspaper here. And I don't read it every day, right? My habits are way more around the app, the New York Times News app. I read that voraciously. I read it multiple times a day. I'm a real news reader. But every once in a while, I'll get a newspaper here at the office, or on the weekend, I'll have the newspaper and I'll be like, what an amazing thing. It's
right.
like, oh yeah, what a phenomenal product. There's a serendipity to it. And you can get that in a cookbook still. And I love that.
No, that's true. And one thing that New York Times Cooking is known for are comments. I mean, I saw a whole Reddit thread that was dedicated to celebrating the comment section because it's the only comment section a lot of people read. In this book, there are comments from users. So how important was that to the book? Where did that idea come from? And how did you pick which comments to pull out?
I'm a broken record. Caitlin was like, we have to bring the voices in. She came to me and was like, with the vision.
Wow.
And I was like, all in on it. And the vision, to be fair, is built on the work my team has been doing all these years, right? But she was the one who was like, I want commenters' voices throughout the book. And I was like, oh yeah, awesome. Absolutely. And then trying to figure out which comment voices to pull. The commenters are really essential to NYT Cooking. They're an amazing bunch. Like, they're incredibly knowledgeable. Like, there are people who really know what they're doing. I mean, there are also people who are like, I subbed this for that. And like, I used coconut oil instead of eggs. And I, like I used flour instead of sugar and it didn't turn out, I'm like, well,
what happened?
What happened? I don't know where you went wrong. But the vast majority of them are making changes, reporting on what they found. They're really talking to each other. They're like recipe talking. And, we do that in person in the office. If you love to cook, you love that kind of chatter.
Yeah.
And also, of course, like our commenting community is famous for like the truly wacky, amazing stories in the comments, like the mini novellas in the comments. That's like a whole other category. And we love those too.
Right. I wonder somebody's probably mining those for novels right now. It's like, oh, if I put this person with that person and these two characters started talking, maybe that's a rom-com in the works.
They're wonderful. I love it. Our comment section has its own Instagram fan account, which we also love.
Yes, it does.
But which I totally love. I've loved it from the moment I knew about it. I love seeing readers' voices in this book, though. It just sort of enhances that. Again, it's empathy. It's like we're all in this together, right? We're trading notes. We're like sharing ideas and we're talking to each other.
And so much of like what we do online now for recipes and whatnot is data driven. I mean, we hear about it so much. How does data drive what you all do at NYT Cooking?
It is a really important signal. It would be so foolish to ignore data. It's like it's free information from Google about what people are interested in, right? And we might not have it forever. I think it would be crazy to ignore it. It does not drive our editorial decision making. We don't do something purely because people are searching for it. And we don't decide to kill something or not go forward with an idea because no one is searching for it. Where it comes into play. And again, this is really not for most of our recipes. Most of our recipes come from our writers, our reporters, and our recipe developers. But if a recipe is going crazy on TikTok and it's like, well, people are searching for, I don't know, blah, blah, blah dish. And we'll look at it and we'll think like, hey, is there a New York Times version to be done of this dish? Should we have this recipe? Does it feel appropriate for us to have this recipe? Sometimes the recipes just don't, it's hard to think of throwing them into the editorial mix. Sometimes it's like, oh yeah, of course. And a lot of times it's pretty straightforward stuff. It's like, hey, at Thanksgiving, people search for roasted squash. And we'll look in cooking and we're like, oh gosh, we have like roasted squash with cumin and da-da-da-da-da-da. We have this, we have that, but we don't have that super simple, like, here's the most basic version. Here are the times you need. Again, the stuff that really helps the people who just sort of want to be guided, right? That's also where data comes into play for us as well. But I mean, really the vast majority, like the vast, vast, vast majority of the recipes in NYT Cooking come to us through our columnists, our reporters, and like the really quite large network of freelance recipe developers we work with who pitch ideas.
One thing you say in your introduction to this book is you didn't want to include dull and dutiful recipes. And so I could see that sometimes if you are trying to, make things simple for people and get them in the kitchen cooking, you might feel like, oh, we need that dull and dutiful recipe. But I'm actually just curious, what do you think a dull and dutiful recipe is?
Yeah, I love that phrasing.
And then what makes it not dull and dutiful?
I would say this is not the book to buy if you're Googling like how to roast squash in the plainest terms, right. or it can be. I mean, it could be for that person, but that's not what's in this book, right? Like these recipes have flavor. It is not how to cook a chicken breast. It is like how to cook a chicken breast in an interesting, delicious, and dynamic way. And that way involves mayo.
I know.
and in this particular instance, chimichurri, right? Look, dull and dutiful. I don't want to disparage straightforward cooking.
Right.
I roast squash. I do it all the time. I think it's a necessary part of a home cooking toolkit. I would say that these recipes aim to kind of, get you a little bit more excited than that. It's not just like a tool in your kit. It's like something you're really, really excited about.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, like, when you write a cookbook, I joke around with some of my friends. I'm like, if you're going to write a Japanese cookbook, you got to have dashi. And as boring as that sounds, got to have dashi because people need to know how you make it. And they're like, really? I'm like, yeah. For me, it's like nukjam dipping sauce, every single one of my books.
Hey, you know what? I agree with that. I think that, and that's, you asked why cookbooks, and this doesn't really apply necessarily to this cookbook, which is, I think, a little bit more of a survey, but like cookbooks offer this unparalleled opportunity to really dive deep. And you can look at a type of cooking or baking, whether it's equipment driven, technique driven, cuisine driven, diet driven. You can really go deep on that subject matter. And then I do think it becomes important to have that sort of part of the book. It's usually in the back where you have the workhorse recipes. I mentioned that I bake a lot. I'm making a birthday cake this week for my older daughter.
Your birthday cakes are so awesome. Every single time you post one, I'm like, damn, where'd you get time to do that? They're layered and frosted.
Weekend cooking, Andrea. That's the next book.
Yes, that's like weekend baking is next.
Thank you for saying that. My cakes are imperfect. They're home baked, but like trying to bring a certain flair.
Nice. I like it.
She's like got a big personality, so it's just fun to like live out loud when making her cakes. Yeah, I love to look at my cookbooks for cakes, and a cookbook I've looked at a lot in the past few years for birthday cakes is Claire Savitz's book Dessert Person. She's got a lot of really show-stopping birthday cakes in there, and in the back she's got all of those foundational recipes. She's got her pastry crust, she's got her buttercream, she's got her cream cheese frosting, very basic stuff. And I do think in a book, when you're diving deep on a subject, you need the foundational recipes and you want to know how that person does it, right? You're going on the journey with that person. You need to understand their approach.
Was there ever a conversation with you and other people on your team about having a basic section in this book? What's great is people can dive right into the recipes. It's very short, like front matters, how to use this book. If you've got pots, pans, I do want to ask you about the note on salt. You're not putting, okay, here's your vinaigrette section, or, here's your chicken stock section. That's just not what this book is about. But did you think for a moment it might need that?
I didn't. I think this book is it's so direct. It's again that like, let's get you there.
Right.
Let's like look at that index and get you where you need to go. And also, frankly, it's not like predicated on the notion that you're making the stock first.
Right.
So I love to cook. I am a person who often has stock in my freezer, or I'll make like a giant batch of stock and I'll freeze it and I'll like use it forevermore. So if a recipe calls for stock and I've got some handy to defrost, like that's what I'm doing. I'm not using box stock, or I use some Better Than Bouillon. But this book is not for the person where you're assuming like, hey, go to page 30, whatever, and learn to make stock. This book is like, you're using what you have, you're using what's at the store. Also, a thing that we know just from NYT Cooking from audience research is that people whose schedules are really demanding, who like to cook, but cooking is not like, doesn't take up a ton of time in their lives, they do all their grocery planning and shopping over the weekend. They're planning for the week before. It's not that like, we'll stop on the way home. It's like we're in Paris. It's very, which is something I hear people say. It's like, I love to stop on the way home. It's like I'm in Paris. And I'm like, well, it's not Paris. It's like, I'll see you at Costco. They're planners in that way, but they're not planners in the like, I'm just going to make the vinaigrette and keep it in the fridge. And I do find that the people who are already inclined to do that kind of do that already. I do that. I do make my own salad dressing. It's like not hard to make. It's just olive oil, lemon juice, and Dijon mustard. But like it's in the fridge. But right. That's interesting. To me, that sort of feels again more like that's sort of like the stuff of a kind of book where we're really trying to like teach you foundations and give you like a deeper dive. Less so like, hey, how can we meet your need right now? Like we see your needs right now. how can we meet your needs right now?
What do you do for audience research?
Oh gosh, we do all kinds of stuff here. there's a big department.
Yeah, I can imagine.
There's a big department at the Times devoted to audience research. And they do all kinds of surveys. They talk with people. I mean, it's everything you could imagine. And it serves the entire newsroom and all the products like Wirecutter and cooking.
Do you think about in your role in food, and you've been at the Times since 2007, I believe?
Yeah.
It's a long, long time to work in food media these days,
Any media.
It's amazing. It's stunning. It's incredible. Do you think about how your work is influencing and impacting others, like in terms of the content you put on there? You describe certain ingredients as electrifying, gochujang, chili crisp, and tahini. So that really shapes what people think of food to be and how they cook and a lot of the chicken recipes. And then you've got tofu in there. And I got to say, you slid tofu it's like one of the first 5 words in your introduction. And that just stirred so many warm fuzzies in my body. I mean, it was like you're making a certain statement in all of these choices. And do you think about that? And how conscious is that process for you and the staff?
I do think about that a lot. But also, frankly, it comes very organically. I don't force myself to think about tofu. I always have tofu in my fridge. I have a brand that I love that is stocked near me, and I actually cook a lot of your tofu recipes, I should say.
Thank you.
As an authority on tofu cooking. So this is the way I cook, and I hope the Times can provide some thought leadership in that regard too. I think that there's this balancing act between meeting people's needs and showing them things they might not know they need yet. And I think this goes in all directions, by the way, in terms of cuisine and ingredients. Just because you grew up in one cuisine doesn't know you all know all the details of some other cuisine, right? It goes in all directions. Right. I hope we're doing that for people. I want to do it in a way that feels like it's just breathing. It's in the air. You can get all these ingredients at every grocery store in this country, probably that's of a decent size. Maybe not a teeny store in the middle of nowhere, but why not tell people hey, cook with this, cook with that, mix it all together. Your life will be more delicious. I would say it's mindful, but it's not calculated. And it is quite authentic to how I cook and how my entire team cooks.
So with all that taken into consideration, audience feedback, you and your team and what excites you, and also just hearing from all these freelancers and contributors, it seems to me that we can watch you for what's coming next. I mean, what do you see the future home cooking in America? Where are we going?
Oh gosh, the future. Well, first of all, I sort of in a lighter, more hopeful note, I think people are eating more vegetables. I think vegetable cooking is moving in what I feel is a promising direction, just as someone who's concerned about climate change. I don't expect the world to go vegan, at least not by choice. But I do think that people are more interested in evolving their diet. And I think that's really positive. I also I cook vegetarian a fair amount. I do not cook chicken at home a lot. I like to cook chicken. I'll roast it on the first chili day, over here in New York. But I'm reaching for the tofu more than I'm reaching for chicken by a long shot. The slightly more ominous thing is AI. I know about as much as AI as anybody else who reads the news. And I do think that's going to reshape cooking, and I don't know how yet. As of now, as best as I can tell, the AI can't taste the recipes, and they're not good.
They're not going to do the cleanup for us.
Yeah. They're not washing the dishes, and they're not tasting the recipes. But it's very, Google in particular is signaling very clearly that they have ambitions for AI to do your meal planning and your this and your that. That'll be interesting to see what happens. Yeah. I don't know. And then, of course, influencers too, TikTok. There's just crazy stuff happening in terms of people thinking about what they need to eat. There's protein.
I know. Or cucumbers in Iceland, and then they sell out, and just goofy things like that, which is a good thing. I'm glad people are excited about eating cucumbers, but it was just these little little moments, just so random.
I agree. There's something delightfully random about all of it. I do think people care more and more about food, and that's huge. We're doing our jobs if people care more and more about food, right?
Yeah. I have these neighbors who went to France on a summer trip, and they came back, and their teenage daughter said, the French spend so much more time than we do cooking dinner on a regular basis. And she looked at her dad. Maybe, I don't know. Is that because they're stopping on the way to get
Right.
some ingredients?
To the marché. I mean, we just need a marché on every corner, and then maybe that'll change.
I would love to live in a culture where it's less about the grind and it's more about eating like a lovely dinner with your loved ones. Like, to me, that sounds amazing. I don't think it is where we live, unfortunately. And I don't think that's the food culture here. And I wish that would change. But I also think that, again, it kind of comes back to empathy. It's like, hey, like, you can want something to change, but you can also kind of meet people where they are now and give them what they need and like hopefully cultivate that love of cooking.
I mean, I think this book is very empathetic to the home cook. I mean, it says it in the title, Easy Weeknight Dinners. It's backed up by all the people who have tested the recipes, all the people who have commented on the recipes and maybe made suggestions through the years. So congratulations on this book. I did have one final question before we let you go. Is there another book in the works that you can talk about?
No comment.
Okay. Oh, we'll just have to stay tuned. I love it.
I'm calling Caitlin.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for these extraordinary questions.
Thanks for joining us. Thanks for listening to Everything Cookbooks. For more episodes and ways to contact us, go to our website, everythingcookbooks.com. This show is available wherever you get your audio, and if you like what you hear, please leave us a review. It really helps people find the show. Any book mentioned can be found on our affiliate page at bookshop.org. Thanks, as always, to our editor, Abby Cirquitella. And until next time, keep on writing, reading, and cooking.